Today was meant to be the joyful beginning of our honeymoon, but instead it turned into a bizarre ordeal. Just as we finished packing our bags and were ready to head out, my husband unexpectedly ripped my passport to shreds. His self-satisfied smirk was infuriating. Truth be told, I had never intended to embark on this honeymoon with him. My plan was always to travel with my mom, given the tension that had been brewing even before our wedding. The strife between my husband and my mother-in-law had always been palpable, but I never grasped the depth of their problematic relationship until today. I have never known anyone else to have their mother-in-law hijack their honeymoon, and the whole scenario left me shocked and seething with anger. Most of all, I felt deeply uncomfortable. As he continued to destroy my passport with scissors, my mother-in-law watched on, grinning triumphantly. It became clear to me that I needed to escape this toxic environment as quickly as possible. Fortunately, this outrageous act provided me with the perfect evidence I needed to expose their true characters. My name is Emma, and I am 31 years old. I've been working for 6 years, and it was just recently that I received the marriage proposal of my dreams from my boyfriend of 3 years. We are currently planning our wedding and honeymoon. We met at work where he was a senior and I was just starting out. He always lent a hand when I faced challenges with new tasks. My past relationship with a college boyfriend fizzled out due to my reserved nature, and after several years of not dating seriously, I never expected to be among the first of my colleagues to get married. My husband always struck me as dependable and trustworthy. When he asked me out for the first time, I was elated. I still hold dear the dolphin figurine we bought on our first date at the aquarium. His intentions were clear from the start. He was dating with marriage in mind, and that made me incredibly happy. After many memorable dates, he proposed at the very same aquarium where it all began. That night, I was so filled with joy that I couldn't sleep. However, a visit to his parents' home shortly after our engagement made me start to question our future together. My father-in-law was welcoming, but my mother-in-law seemed less than pleased with me. Her dismissive comment about how he could have married someone more outstanding than this plain girl filled me with doubt and anxiety about our life together. Initially, I told myself that the nerves before the wedding were normal, so I brushed aside my concerns and pushed forward with the wedding plans. During one conversation about our future life together, both my husband and his mother assumed that I would quit my job after getting married. Although I once entertained the idea of leaving work to focus on family life, I realized that my job was a source of stability and confidence for me, especially amidst my growing anxieties about marriage. Despite the constant pressure from my mother-in-law to quit, I resolved to keep my position at the same company where my husband worked. As we planned the wedding, we faced a disagreement about when to officially register our marriage. My husband wanted to do it sooner rather than later. Ultimately, we respected his preference and registered our marriage, which, despite feeling routine, filled me with joy once I realized we were officially married. We initially planned for a small and intimate wedding. However, once my husband mentioned this to his mother, she intervened immediately. "Mason's wedding is too important for a small gathering," she declared over the phone. "The wedding must be grand, and I will ensure it's appropriate for Mason. Keep your guest list to just your parents and close friends. I suppose your friends are as uninteresting as you, and they'd only dampen the mood." I was overwhelmed by her forceful opinions on everything from the venue to the guest list, and it was frustrating to see her assert so much control. But I convinced myself that perhaps this was just the nature of weddings, and I reluctantly agreed to limit my guest list to just my parents and a few friends, as she wanted. However, her meddling didn't stop there. She had strong opinions on the program, entertainment, decorations, and catering. Following her demands would stretch our budget significantly. Initially, Mason's family had agreed to cover half of the wedding costs, but suddenly that arrangement changed, leaving me to shoulder the extra financial burdens for the grand wedding she envisioned. In an attempt to manage costs discreetly, I made some economical choices, but she criticized these decisions harshly, claiming they looked cheap and accused me of not following her instructions. After all the compromises and challenges, I hoped that the wedding would mark the end of her overbearing involvement. But as I soon learned, distancing myself from her influence was not going to be as easy as I had hoped. After our wedding, my husband made a decision that left me completely astounded. Despite my repeated frustrations with his mother's excessive involvement in our wedding plans and my clear desire to maintain some distance from her, my husband decided that we should live with her. Without my knowledge, he canceled the lease on our new apartment that we had already signed. All my belongings, which were meant for our new home, were instead sent to his family's house. I was left speechless, unable to comprehend how these major decisions had been made without my input. During the wedding planning, I had managed everything meticulously, even warning Mason that complying with all his mother's demands would stretch our budget too thin. He brushed off my concerns. The anxiety that had built up before our wedding only grew stronger after the ceremony. We had planned an overseas honeymoon to a destination I had always dreamed of visiting. The thought of celebrating our marriage there felt almost magical. However, my excitement was severely dampened by my growing discomfort with Mason's odd behavior and the looming reality of living with my mother-in-law upon our return. Despite my efforts, Mason did not cooperate much with the honeymoon planning. Oddly enough, he took it upon himself to book our flights and hotel. I was under the impression that he had chosen a romantic setting for our honeymoon, and despite covering all the costs myself, I was grateful he seemed to be contributing in some way. However, the night before we were supposed to leave for our honeymoon, Mason casually dropped a bombshell that shattered everything. As I was double-checking our luggage, he nonchalantly mentioned, "Emma, I'm going to go with my mom." I was in shock, unable to process his words. "What are you talking about? It's our honeymoon, not just any trip. Why would your mother be joining us? We've only paid for 2 flight tickets and the hotel." As I struggled to understand his logic, Mason surprised me yet again. "I never mentioned going on this trip with you, did I? Don't be ridiculous. I'm going with my mom. It's a gratitude trip for all she's done for me. You stay here and get the house ready by cleaning every nook and cranny." In a dramatic display, Mason then tore up my passport, which I had entrusted to him. Rendered speechless, I could only watch in horror as he destroyed it. Just then, his fully made-up mother barged into our room without knocking, eager to leave. "Mason, are you ready?" she asked. His face lit up with excitement. "Yeah, we're good to go. Finally, we can take this trip without any interruptions." They both shared a gleeful laugh, leaving me utterly disgusted. At that moment, I realized I was about to embark on a life with someone who was turning out to be a complete nightmare. While I had been figuring out how to coexist with my mother-in-law, this was beyond anything I could have imagined. As they laughed and left together, any words I could muster felt futile, dismissed as mere sour grapes by them. I had been relieved that Mason seemed to be helping with the honeymoon, but it turned out he had been planning to travel with his mother all along, booking everything in her name and leaving me to bear all the costs. The betrayal by my husband was a profound and painful blow, but my fury overshadowed the sadness, the quaint, intimate wedding I had always dreamt of, and the honeymoon that was meant to be the highlight of my life with the one I loved were both tainted by the actions of my mother-in-law and my husband. Overwhelmed by the turn of events, I was initially in denial, but I quickly resolved that I needed to take decisive action. I decided to file for divorce. Interestingly, I had inadvertently prepared a powerful tool for my divorce proceedings. From the onset of our wedding preparations, I started recording audio clips, hoping to capture the joyous moments of these significant milestones. What began as an innocent desire to preserve happy memories of our wedding day soon turned into a chronicle of my mother-in-law's intrusive and undermining behavior. Though I had often considered stopping the recordings, assuming I'd never want to revisit them, it was ironic how valuable they became. Just days after moving in, as I was repacking my belongings, most of which I hadn't even unpacked, I pondered whether my husband and his mother had made it to the airport. This thought ignited an indescribable rage within me. so I focused on erasing any trace of my brief stay in that house. While cleaning the living room, I stumbled upon a shocking discovery: evidence of my husband embezzling money from his company. In his role overseeing company sales, he was underreporting earnings and pocketing the difference, and it appeared his mother was complicit. She had meticulously noted the actual sales, the amounts he skimmed off, and even cataloged the luxury items he bought for her with that money. Finding such incriminating evidence left out in the open was baffling. Realizing the gravity of these revelations, I briefly considered whether working at the same company might allow me to smooth things over, but I dismissed the thought. Why should I cover for someone who had so callously replaced me with his mother for our honeymoon? Armed with the evidence, I went straight to our company. Although they were supposed to be on their honeymoon, having both taken paid leave, my presence in the office instead sparked disbelief among my colleagues. When asked if I was supposed to be on my honeymoon, I no longer felt the need to conceal the truth. I revealed that my husband and his mother had gone without me, that my passport had been destroyed, and that I had paid for the entire trip myself. My colleagues, superiors, and boss were shocked and dismayed by my story. Expressing my gratitude for their concern, I then made my way to the executive wing of the company. Unbeknownst to my colleagues, and even my husband and mother-in-law, one of the top executives at the company is my uncle. I had intentionally kept our relationship a secret to avoid any implications that I had obtained my job through nepotism. I applied to the company without disclosing my connection and earned my position on my own merits. Although my uncle doesn't oversee human resources, I had reached out to him before my orientation to ask that our relationship remain confidential at work. Surprised but understanding, he had commended my integrity and assured me that our interactions would remain professional. Despite not having children of his own, my uncle had always shown me affection and support, traits I now found myself relying on more than ever in this troubling time. Ever since I was a little girl through to elementary school, my sisters and I enjoyed several trips with just my uncle. During these early years, I would often coax him into buying me little treats, which sometimes led to scoldings from my parents. My uncle always had a special affection for me, a bond that was clear even then. After I joined the company where he was an executive, we kept our professional lives distinctly separate. Beyond a few smiles exchanged during my orientation, we hadn't interacted at work. When the crisis with my husband and mother-in-law unfolded, I knew I needed support, so I went to my uncle's office. I explained the situation to his secretary and was quickly ushered in. My uncle's initial smile faded to a look of concern when he saw me. "Why are you here? Weren't you supposed to be on your honeymoon?" he asked. Overcome with emotion upon seeing his familiar, kind face, I burst into tears and recounted everything: how my honeymoon was hijacked, the living arrangements, and my husband's betrayal. I also disclosed my husband's embezzlement, handing my uncle the damning evidence. His reaction was one of visible fury, a side of him I had never seen before. He immediately promised to call a board meeting to address the issue. After discussing these heavy matters, he suggested we go grab some lunch, trying to lift my spirits before I headed back home. Despite the heartbreaking betrayal, it was comforting to know there were still people in my life who genuinely cared about my well-being. A week later, when my husband and his mother returned from the trip meant to be our honeymoon, my husband furiously called me for not picking them up from the airport and for not having the house cleaned as he had demanded. He ranted about my unexplained absence. By this point, I had already secured a top-notch divorce lawyer, recommended by my uncle and parents, and the legal process was underway. Without letting my husband finish, I retorted sharply, "You two sure are loud and annoying. I don't want to hear your voice anymore. Why would I pick up someone I'm divorcing? And why would I follow your silly orders?" His response was filled with disbelief and continued arrogance. "Do you think it's okay for you to say such things? I did you a favor by marrying you. If I divorce you, you'll never get remarried. My mom's furious too. If you come back now and prepare our meals, I might forgive you. We're tired of foreign food." His words were harsher than any before, but they only reaffirmed my decision. After revealing his true colors through the passport incident and the trip, I saw him for who he truly was. As he continued his rant, I cut him off. "I've consulted a lawyer about our divorce. Please discuss any further matters with them." "What are you talking about? I'm not getting a divorce," he blustered, clearly unprepared. I could hear his mother in the background, shouting to take the phone and hurling insults my way. Calmly, I added, "By the way, I've informed the company about your embezzlement. They'll be calling you in soon. Maybe you should get a lawyer too." Hanging up, I could almost feel his panic through the phone line. This painful chapter was closing, and despite everything, I was ready to move on and heal, supported by those who truly cared for me. It wasn't my problem anymore. My husband kept calling me, but I chose to block his number to avoid further stress. My uncle was already informed about our supposed honeymoon dates, so right after I had spoken to him about the situation, he moved quickly. Using the evidence I provided, the company promptly summoned my husband and began verifying the financial discrepancies I had reported. It turned out the amount he embezzled was substantial. During a meeting with the company's executives, my husband desperately tried to shift the blame onto me, fabricating a story that I was the real embezzler. My uncle, unable to restrain himself, vehemently defended me, asserting, "My niece would never do such a thing. We've confirmed that you and your mother are the culprits of the embezzlement. You're lucky we haven't called the police yet." Caught red-handed and now aware that I was connected to senior management, my husband seemed utterly defeated, as if he had lost everything at that moment. Later that day, I returned to the company to return the wedding gifts my colleagues had given us, given that our marriage had dissolved so quickly after the ceremony. However, everyone refused to take them back, insisting they were given as blessings. While I was enveloped by this support, my soon-to-be ex-husband approached me, bewildered. "Why didn't you tell me you were related to the top brass? I'm sorry. Can we start over? Can you ask your uncle to let me keep my job and make this embezzlement issue disappear?" I was appalled by his audacity. "Do you even hear what you're saying? Reflect on your actions and face the consequences. Divorce is the only option now," I said, pushing him away. With nowhere else to turn, he clung on desperately. Watching this, my colleagues called security, who promptly escorted him out. He was terminated from his position immediately, and the company began seeking damages for the embezzlement. During this tumultuous time, my mother-in-law tried to contact my family repeatedly. However, once she spoke with my level-headed father-in-law, the calls ceased. I had always wondered why my sensible father-in-law had permitted our honeymoon arrangement in the first place. He later came to me to apologize, admitting his mistake and explaining he had been misled into believing my mother-in-law was going on a domestic trip with friends. He had been looking forward to a peaceful week without her nagging about shopping and dining out, thinking it would be a slice of heaven. Returning home after the ordeal, my father-in-law supported my decision to move back to my parents' house and even helped me pack. Given the high emotions, we didn't discuss much else at the time. Knowing the kind, rational nature of my father-in-law reassured me that he would have intervened had he known the true situation. He was the only person in that household whom I felt I could truly trust. Although I was the victim, the humiliation of having my honeymoon hijacked was overwhelming. I contemplated resigning from my job. My parents suggested taking some time off work. However, my uncle, considering that work might provide a helpful distraction, discussed my situation with the CEO. They arranged for me to be transferred to a branch office, allowing me some space and a fresh start. The divorce process with my husband proceeded surprisingly smoothly, thanks to an excellent lawyer and the clear evidence of his wrongdoing. When planning our wedding and discussing the financial aspects, it became apparent that my husband had almost no savings. Similarly, my in-laws, who were an average working-class family, had little to spare due to my mother-in-law's excessive spending habits. My father-in-law ruefully noted that despite the short duration of our marriage, the alimony was substantial. Surprisingly, he even sold the family home to cover it. Their house wasn't located in the city center, but was part of a close-knit community where rumors spread quickly and stories were exaggerated, making life there increasingly uncomfortable. Initially, my mother-in-law had approved of our marriage, partly because both my husband and I worked for well-known companies, which was a status symbol for her. However, as rumors about her behavior and the subsequent scandal began to circulate, she likely found it unbearable to continue living there. Moreover, my father-in-law likely felt a sense of responsibility to manage the financial fallout from my husband's embezzlement. Despite my disdain for my husband and mother-in-law, I couldn't help but feel genuinely sorry for my father-in-law. After my husband was fired and required to pay damages, coupled with my decision not to return, he apparently suffered a mental breakdown and became unable to work. This left him moping around in a small apartment to which he had moved. Seeing her son in such a state, my mother-in-law became reclusive. In a candid conversation, my father-in-law expressed his exhaustion with my mother-in-law's antics and was even contemplating divorce. Unwilling to spend his later years in misery, he inquired if I could connect him with the lawyer who handled my divorce. I promptly contacted my uncle, who reached out to the lawyer on his behalf. While it might take some time, I am hopeful that my father-in-law can eventually lead the life he desires. Thanks to my uncle and the intervention of the company's CEO, I was transferred to a branch office where I was surrounded by supportive colleagues and superiors. I am eternally grateful for my uncle's unwavering support throughout this ordeal. My only regret through all this has been missing out on the country we had planned to visit for our honeymoon. Once things settle down, I hope to take that trip abroad, a journey meant for healing and reflection after a tumultuous chapter in my life.